Welcome out here to the program, Jessica, someone that I spent a lot of childhood with, which is
Mhm.
very rare being a military brat.
Right, right. Yep.
But not only a childhood friend, dear friend of mine here as an adult as well, but also someone who helped me get into recovery. I was kicking and screaming whenever I first was introduced to it, so we're gonna talk about that as well as recovery journey. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah,
Happy
like I
to.
mentioned, you and I we grew up on the military base, good old Elmendorf. Now, what
Yes,
what I find
for sure.
interesting, I didn't realize this, or maybe I did and completely forgot, but as opposed to being a military brat, where it's jumping from place to place to place to place, that's not the case with you.
It's not. I'm a very lucky military brat in the sense that I'm the youngest. So we moved to Alaska kindergarten right before I started kindergarten. And my dad retired when I was in eighth grade. And my older sister was a sophomore in high school. And they had kind of made a commitment to each other. My parents did that they weren't going to do that again because my middle sister was in high school. When we moved to Alaska, my oldest sister was a junior in high school. And they were like, we don't want to do that again. So they stayed. And then, of course, when my sister was graduated, now I was a sophomore. So voila, Alaska it was. And then everybody ended up moving here because this is where like my parents met and this is where all the extended family lives. So then everybody moved to Arizona in high school or after
There,
high school. Sorry.
there you go. So which one do you prefer? Do you prefer Arizona or Alaska? I'm going to put you on the spot there.
Alaska summers,
There
Arizona.
it is. That is the always typical Alaskan answer. Like during the winters, anywhere else but Alaska. But any
Anywhere
other,
but Alaska. Like, please, no, whatever. I don't want to be in Alaska. Yeah, no. And what's funny is like the last two times I've been back to Alaska, one
Mhm,
was in February, gross, snowing. It was awful. And then the time before that was Leticia's wedding, one of
mhm.
our mutual friends. And she got married and well, she was already married, but they had like the whole ceremony. That was in October. I'm like, listen, we need to time this out better. I need to come back in this summer when it's not cold. But granted, I mean, I've lived here for it'll be 20 years this year.
Oh wow.
So if I like, even if I went back in the summer, I would be that person that we used to always make fun of who had on like jeans and long sleeve shirts. Meanwhile, we were like t-shirts and shorts running around like crazy people playing in the water.
Right. Exactly. Uh, some old habits are hard to let go of. Hence why
Right.
we're in recovery.
Facts.
So let's lead off here. As people can see on YouTube, if they are watching Wrestling with Recovery Pod on YouTube, um, you have 15 years of sobriety. So let's
16.
hear it. I want to hear your recovery story. Where did it start for you?
So yeah, I got the sweet 16 this year, which is crazy. I'm old enough to drive in recovery, but yeah. So I mean, I come from a family of alcoholics. Like I may always make the joke that you shake the family tree and alcoholics fall out, and the Al-Anons are hanging on for dear life. Um, and I've known my whole life. Like my dad's biological father died of alcoholism. There's siblings on both sides, mom and dad, who have troubles with drugs and alcohol. My parents got sober very young, like 18 and 19 years old. So I've always known like to be careful, right?
Mhm.
And so even when I did start drinking, I had rules on my drinking. And pro tip, if you have rules on your drinking, might want to take a look at that. Shocking. But just take a look. And so my very first drunk was very much like the rest of them. I got completely inebriated, crazy drunk. And like my friends were trying to get me to drink water. They were scared I was going to have alcohol poisoning. And, I blacked out, came to, people were having sex. That was weird. Like my church friend, God bless her, she came with me to this party. And the next morning I wake up and my car's gone. She's gone. Like it was not good, and albeit there was so much craziness that night, like the feeling of wanting, like losing that control and not having to have that control.
Mhm.
I wanted that back. Like that was something that I'm like, yeah, this was insane, And last night was crazy, but like, when do I get to do it again? But also knowing I shouldn't do it too soon, because then, we might have a problem. And so I had what we like to call controlled drinking for quite some time. I moved to Arizona right after I graduated high school, with no intention of staying here. Like, let's be real clear on that fact. And, and then I found my cousin. Well, I didn't find my cousin. Obviously, I knew where he was at, but my cousin partied like I did. And so, although I hated it here, like I remember when I landed, one of my aunts was like, "Welcome home." And I'm like, gross. It's freaking like, it was October when I moved here, and like I had on sweatpants and like a long sleeve shirt. And I remember being on the plane on the tarmac, like, why is it so warm? It's October. Like, Arizona doesn't know how to do winter. And so, but then I started partying with my cousin, and he's about 6 years older than me. And so, I could get into bars with him and his friends. And because they were regulars, I wasn't questioned. So I was able to drink, didn't need to get, the fake ID. I'd make drunk driving a sport, like I would, all my ego and bravado, right? I'd be like, "Hey, I'm going to drink you under the table and then I'm going to drive your ass home," and it all kind of came to a head in 2008. I was really active in church. I've always been a, church goer, and, because that's when God sees you. So you got to make up for what you did Saturday night. But I was teaching confirmation, and there was all these young kids. And they were giving up stuff. Like when I was a kid, I gave up video games because like we had the rule of if you were inside, you were cleaning. Right. So I never really played video games as it was. So like, I'm going to give up something that I won't like naturally do. Right. Because then God won't be mad. And so these kids were giving up hard stuff. And when I say kids, I'm talking like 12, 13-year-olds. Like, they're young. And so it gets around to me and I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm going to drink. I think that's what I'm going to do for Lent. I'm not going to drink. And this little punk ass, am I allowed to cuss?
Yeah, we allow it. We allow it here. It's
okay. I'll try to keep it PG. But this little punk ass kid was like, "Oh, is it really that bad?" I was like, "You son of a," I could have right there. I'm like, "Don't you out me in front of all these people." And, unbeknownst to me, later find out that he is a child of an alcoholic, and he's, you spot it. And I lasted 2 weeks and went to a family get together. My aunt was turning 50, and I was probably like 150 pounds heavier than I am now. And they decided that they wanted to hike this mountain called Superstition here. Like, literally, people use that mountain to train for the Grand Canyon. And it's March, and we're going to hike Superstition with my entire family, albeit I'm not close with my entire family at this point. So this is a nightmare and like just awful to start. Right. And, I'm just not drinking. And I'm white knuckling it, and I'm hating every second of my life. Right. And we end up going back to my aunt's house later that evening, and some stuff goes down, and I'm drinking, and, I was really mean to my mom that night and my sisters. And, I'm glad my dad wasn't there because I would have had to answer for that immediately. But the next day my dad called me. And of course, I feel like crap. I'm awful. I hate my life. And he's like, "Hey, we're going to come get you. We're going to dinner." And I'm like, "No, I got to go to church." I wasn't going to church. I felt sicker than heck. And he was like, "Yeah, I don't think so. We're going to come pick you up." And I knew I was going to be getting tongue lashing. Like, I was going to be in so much trouble for how I behaved and blah, blah, blah. And, that's not what happened. My dad sat across the table and he talked about what it was like for him to get sober young, and, that he was concerned. And then he dared me, and Zoe knows, like, F around and find out if you want to challenge me, right? And so he dared me to check out a 12-step program for a week. And if I didn't get drunk at the end of that week, I might not be an alcoholic. And it was like, finally, I have the solution that's going to keep me. I can finally prove that I'm not an alcoholic, And I went to every meeting. I cried every single day in those meetings, and I ripped up their phone list, and I got mad that they were handing me tissues. Like, I had this facade that I was crazy angry, but I was just a sad little girl, and I ended up, of course, I got drunk at the end of that week, and it was the scariest drunk I've had in my life. And the following Sunday, I still felt drunk, but I went to my sister's house, the oldest sister. And I should mention that she was at dinner as well. So it was my sister, my 4-year-old at the time nephew, my mom, and my dad. And I went to her house and I was green. Like I just looked awful, and I went over to do laundry because, studio apartment. And, she said, she's like, you know what? I'm not willing to watch Mason or have Mason watch you die. That's my nephew. And so either get sober or you got to go. And, a lot of people say you can't get sober for anyone else. And I call BS on that because frankly, anytime I came to after drinking, I was angry. Like, why am I still here? Like, you could have took me last night. God, I gave you enough that I could have been gone, And so to get sober for me, like I hated me. But my nephew, on the other hand, he's the reason why I moved to Arizona. Like, he's my world. And that just wasn't an option for me to say, that I wasn't going to be in his life anymore. So I went back to that 12-step meeting. I turned in my 24-hour chip because I still felt drunk. And the following day when I went to work, I should mention, I was with work people when we were drinking that Friday night. And my director pulled me into a meeting and he's like, I can drink like a fish, but nobody at work knows about it. And I'm tired of hearing of your things that happened when you were drinking with coworkers at work. So he told me I was mandatory, that I needed to be off work for 2 weeks. And if I didn't come back either with my drinking in check or no longer drinking, I wasn't going to have a job. And at that moment, all like denial, everything was gone. It was like, okay, you're an alcoholic. Doesn't matter that you're 22 years old. Get your shit together, and that date was March 10th, or that Sunday was March 10th, 2008. And by the grace of God, although I have absolutely found it necessary to pick up a drink or drug in the last 16 years, by the grace of God, it hasn't happened. Things have happened to intervene to make it stop, meaning the craving or the urge or the plan,
Right.
God shows up with something and it's like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll go do that. And I'm sure we'll get more into that part because we both have, well, we're going to talk about some heavy stuff. But,
Yeah.
the closest that I ever got to a relapse was when our friend passed. That was
Yeah.
probably the closest that I had planned it. I knew what I was going to do. And God showed up and showed off and it didn't happen, and yeah, ever since, I mean, it hasn't been rainbows and unicorns,
Right.
life gets hard. Life still is lifey. Just because we're sober doesn't mean that life doesn't happen, but there was an old timer who, he was a crotchety old man, drove a Harley, always had a pistol on his hip. Like but he was such a huge teddy bear, right? You just had to get to know him. And he used to say, life isn't a rose bush, but if you know what a rose bush looks like, it takes work and you're going to get cut forming it into that beautiful bush. There are thorns that are going to hurt you. But if you do the work, you will absolutely have that rose bush to be proud of, and there's been a lot of work. And I can say that today, albeit there may be some twigs hanging out that need to be trimmed up a little bit, for the most part, God has graced me with a rose bush that I don't deserve, and it's just by doing a little bit of work and action on my part and fully trusting that he's got a plan. It's none of my business. I just have to take the steps to get to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Here on Wrestling with Recovery, doing the story version, which I hope to roll out the series here as a part of this program, talking about being in recovery.
Yeah.
Now, going back, you mentioned you found your bottom, so to speak.
Yep.
And I believe someone that I look highly up to when it comes to sharing their recovery story is Jeff Jarrett. He says he always says he doesn't believe in coincidences. He believes in convergences because there's the higher power, God, whatever you want to call it, is always working.
Right.
And so when you look at that, I mean, here you have within a short time your sister saying, "Hey, either get clean, or you're not going to see your nephew." And then you have your work also stepping in there. Would you say that was probably your first instance, perhaps, I don't want to say spiritual awakening, but kind of a sense of, okay, hold on, there's something bigger going on?
I didn't see it at that time. I mean, I definitely had people bring their concerns about my drinking to my attention. You know what I mean? I remember one of my church lady friends, she used to say, well, why don't you have like a drink of water before you have your next drink? And I remember thinking like, why? What? Why would I want to do that? Like, that's just a horrible idea. You know what I mean? But looking back on it, I do believe that my higher power, who I choose to call God, knew that for me, like my sister telling me I wasn't going to see my nephew, like was going to be the thing that catapulted it. And the nail in the coffin, so to speak, was going to be my work saying, no, like we're tired of hearing of it. Get your shit together or don't come back, and that was the like after the fact and looking back on it years later, I will say, it was definitely all right, God, I see what you did there,
Yeah. Now, prior to going into 12-step programs, like you mentioned,
Mhm.
your family had a history of it, and it
Sure.
sounds like maybe talked a little bit more openly about battling addiction and alcoholism. What was your thought? What was your personal stance prior to going into a 12-step program? What were some misconceptions, beliefs that you had going into it?
I mean, truly, I thought it was cold. You know what I mean? Granted,
Mhm.
I say that on one hand, but at the same time, like most of my family outside of my true blood family, like aunts and uncles, outside of that, most of the people that I considered like family I've grown up with, I've known in my whole life, I know them because they were in recovery with my parents. You know what I mean? So it's
Right.
like, but at the same time, there were certain things that would happen that it was like, insanity in the house or whatever. And then mom or dad would go to a meeting and then come back. And so there was like a resentment towards AA of like, you left when we needed you here. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
No,
And
that makes sense.
just the complete misconception now being an adult looking back on it. I'm like, no, you left so you didn't murder me for
Right.
being a complete dick of a kid. And like, so you went to a meeting and thank you, AA, for saving my life as a child. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? Like, not that my dad would have killed me, but still, you know what I mean? Like,
Point
looking
being.
at it now, it's like, oh, okay, I see what you needed to do there, and truly looking at like all of it of the being an adult doing my own 12-step work and true inventories, I can look at you know people truly, whether it be my parents, my siblings, my friends, they're doing the best with the tools that they have. And regardless if anyone's given those tools or whatever, the tools they're choosing to pick up and use, they're doing the best they can with those, and I can't expect anybody to do differently. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can expect myself to do different, but like when speaking, just keeping it here between the two of us, I remember like with you, like he knows what to do. I have told him what to do. I have given him my suggestions. Like at this point, and I think you and I had the conversation of, oh, I'm not going to talk to you if you're drinking.
Right.
Don't call me drunk. Like you rude asshole. Stop it. You know what I mean? Like,
I hate to
and
break it to you,
that's
like
the
even in
boundary that had to
recovery,
be
I'm
put out
still a
there.
rude asshole.
Yeah, more so if you're drinking. I'm just saying. If there's alcohol involved, and I mean that's the case with both of us, right? Like if I'm drinking, I'm a completely different person. You know what I mean? Like I can still, as you know, Zola, I can tell you like it is. I can be straight up with you, but drinking Jessica versus sober Jessica, like this one, I was a fighter. You know what I mean? Like I took pride in the fact that I could beat anybody up in a bar. You know, this one, I haven't hit, not only have I not picked up a drink or a drug in 16 years, I have not laid my hands on anyone in 16 years. And for me, that's a victory.
Not just morally, but probably financially too, because getting out of jail is not cheap.
That part,
Um,
that part.
so would you say then, with your with getting to the point where you knew I need to get my act together,
Hmm.
that you had a high bottom? Because we talk about,
Oh, 100%.
you hear in recovery programs people saying, well, my bottom then wasn't my bottom, but there are
Right.
instances in this case where there are high bottoms.
Oh, absolutely. No, I absolutely had a high bottom. By the time I got sober, and it was an ego thing for me too. I would say like, I still had an apartment, I still had a car, I still had a job, and I get sober, right? But part of my recovery journey, I didn't do a lot of the work that was required of me in the beginning. And so by 3 years sober, oh, and I had never been to jail. That was another thing that I threw in that mix. I had lost the apartment. I had lost the car. I had lost the job. I had been to jail. Like, so the caboose of there's that saying of like the caboose of the train doesn't kill you on the first drink. You know what I mean? Like,
Hmm.
it's not, it's that first train car that's going to get your ass. Well, same goes for that. If I get sober, my destruction of what I did in my disease doesn't stop just because I got sober. Like, I have to do
Right.
some work to repair those relationships, whether albeit financial, whatever. I have to do some work to get that, to repair all of that. So that destruction is still continuing in the time I'm not fixing that. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
And in a lot of cases, it gets worse because you didn't address what needed to be addressed.
Yeah, whenever I look at my recovery, that's what's been my biggest tripping point. Because I remember whenever I had an intervention, you know, I'm very proud of the things that I've accomplished in life, but yet at
Sure.
the time, um, sobriety abstinence wasn't one of them. And I remember with a tear in my eye saying, I can't figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it took time. Now, whenever you mention that, and I'm glad you brought it up because I think that is one of the biggest misconceptions about getting into, let's just call it sobriety right now,
Mm-hmm.
because I think it takes a while to realize, okay, hold on, I've got to do recovery work, not
Yeah.
just abstain from drinking, using, drugging, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. It's different.
Yeah, absolutely, not completely different.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you did your 12 or yeah, doing the step work, did you think, okay, I'm fixed, or did you start to realize, hey, hold on here, there's a bit more I've got to do?
Yeah. So I was actually, I mean, from very early on, I had sponsors that were like, you know what, I think you need to go to therapy.
Hmm.
And I was adamant against it. Adamant against it. Like, because in my experience, every time I tried therapy before I got sober, all they told me was to go to AA. I'm like, yeah, a lot of help you are. Like, ew, gross. I'm not an alcoholic. Leave me alone. You know what I mean? And so it was not something that I wanted to do. I'm like, I'm not
Yeah.
going to therapy, you know? And it wasn't until 10 years sober when a lot of stuff went down, including us losing our friend, that my sponsor I had at the time, that she's like, listen, I am not going to work with you unless you go to therapy.
Hmm.
Like, you just went through a crap ton of trauma in a very short amount of time. I'm not a trauma therapist. I'm not qualified. Go get help, you know? And that was the like, oh, okay, yeah. And there is a difference between being in recovery and being sober. I mean, even when I met my husband, you know, we met online and, you know, he said, it started off with like, yeah, I don't drink. And he said, yeah, I'm sober too. And I said, oh, cool. I'm in recovery. And then he was like, yeah, me too, because it's different, right? Like,
Right.
we come across people all the time that for one reason or another, they're sober, whether it's, you know, religion, whether it's just preference, whether it's fear of, you know, falling into their parents' tracks of drinking and drugging. There's one reason or another that they are sober. It is a completely different world to be in recovery, to be
Yeah.
in the throes of recovery. You know, I'm on a list of people who are willing to do 12-step calls, to go to someone's house. You know what I mean? Like, I have women that I sponsor. I have a sponsor. I have meetings that I'm committed to that I'm at every week. My people I sponsor and I know closely know Monday night, Friday night, you know where you're going to find me. You know, I have my committed spots that I'm at. You know what I mean? And that's completely different from just someone who's sober, you
Yep.
know?
And actually, for people listening and watching, Wrestling with Recovery Pod on socials, also on YouTube as well, go back to episode 1 right from the get go. I talk about that, the
Yep.
difference between recovery and sobriety, and
Yeah.
why they are so easily intertwined. But yet, it is, if you are thinking about getting sober or have a loved one that is trying to get sober, why it is important to look at those two as completely separate
Mhm.
deals, because it is an absolute game changer in
Right.
terms of the recovery journey.
Yeah.
Now, before we talk about big T, little T trauma and how that can affect not just sobriety but recovery,
Yeah.
I think you brought up a great point there. Dating, I mean, dating is hard to
Yes.
begin with, but then you
Facts.
throw in the fact that, hey, you know what? I know that I'm an alcoholic, or I know I abuse substances and I have to abstain from these,
Right.
let alone be in recovery.
Mhm.
Um, whether with your husband or maybe just trying to strike the conversation and it
Mhm.
going south, how did you address that in terms
Right
of
away.
bringing up right away? Okay.
Right away. It wasn't because here's the thing, right? Like if I'm going to give you my time, and this is going to sound very ego, it's not. Trust me. My time is precious. I mean, I have a gaggle of nieces and nephews, right? I'm the youngest of four siblings, all of which are married, right? Like my parents live here in Arizona. They live 20 minutes from me, right? Like, and I'm very involved with said family. So, and on top of that, I am an active member in recovery that I am doing things all the time. Like my family knows if you want me on a Saturday morning, you're going to have to let me know like a couple weeks in advance because chances are I'm already have something. You know what I mean? Like something's already
Mhm.
planned. I'm already committed to something. So if I'm going to be dating someone, you need to know that I'm in recovery. That's what I'm doing. Like I have this commitment. And if you want to come, cool. If it's an open meeting, awesome. You can come if you're not, one of us. But you know, it's a level of I call it 5 pillars of accountability. Okay. So the first pillar is God. I'm accountable to God. Like I'm accountable to make sure that when I get up in the morning, I start my day with my higher power. Like, listen, homie, about to get out of bed. Been a great day so far. If you could help with the rest of it, that'd be great. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and then the next one is to myself. Like I'm eating right. I'm taking care of, I got the coffee going or whatever. I'm doing the prayer and meditation, you know, doing any fitness things, whatever. I'm doing what I need to do to be the best me I can be. Right. And then the next one is my immediate family. And in this case, it's just my husband, right? That if my husband calls me and let's say I was supposed to meet with a sponsee or I'm supposed to be going to a meeting and he's sick or God forbid something awful has happened, I need to go to be with my husband because that's my third level of accountability. And then fourth is the recovery world, whether it be meetings, sponsees, whatever, that's what I'm committed to next. And then last is the extracurriculars, like those monthly potlucks or whatever. Like if I can't go or if I haven't had a quality week with my husband, then I'm going back to accountability level number 3, which is my husband. So when it comes to the dating side of that, like those are my 5 pillars. That's what I stick to. Why would I not let you know that I'm in recovery? I have this whole life that I live right out of the gate before I share any personal, these are my hopes and dreams and aspirations. When meanwhile, you're like, this potential dating person is like, well, I drink every night, so that's not going to work for me. But I just told you all my deepest, darkest secrets. And this isn't going to work now. You know what I mean? So, yeah,
Right.
very early in us talking, I think before we even met, well, no, absolutely before we even met, on just the chatting on the dating site, right? Like we both knew that the other was in recovery. And the important part of that too is I had to make sure that he had over a year sober because I'm no 13 stepper. And he did. So it was like, okay, cool. And again, this is kind of where God shows up and shows off because come to find out, like I saw his sponsor get sober. Like a lot of our mutual friends, when they saw us together, they were like, well, why didn't we do that? I'm like, yeah, why didn't you? Because hello, like we are truly like it's the perfect blend when it comes together. Like we both have the same faith. We both, have the same political views and we're both active in recovery and we're both extremely close to our families. Like it truly was a perfect match for us to end up together. And the fact that it wasn't in a meeting, because I never dated in meetings. Like you don't eat where you shit. You know what I mean? Like just don't do it. And so I never, there might have been somebody I thought like, oh, he cute. Nope. Sorry, in a meeting, not doing it because the last thing I want to do is say, okay, I can't go to this meeting or I don't want to go to this meeting because I don't want so and so to feel uncomfortable that I'm there because they're my ex. So Bobby's actually like early in recovery. I dated one guy and it was a complete shit show. So never again. And since then, Bobby was the only guy that I dated that was active in recovery. And then we ended up getting married.
There you
Funny
go.
how that works.
Almost. I mean, you're working on your happy ending now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is Wrestling with Recovery, interviewing Jessica, sharing stories in recovery as part of the series here. And then, whenever I asked you to do this
Mhm.
interview, One of the things I asked you was what's off topic, because
Right.
sometimes, because I want this to be a conversational deal. I want people to be comfortable coming
Mhm.
on here and
Right.
talking. And, and what surprised me was you Uno reversed it on me and said,
Uh-huh.
okay, are we going to talk about trauma? Are you okay
Right.
with this? Now, because only the way you can, pretty just straightforward,
Yeah.
which I love. I love that about you. My drunkenness, I didn't, but in recovery, I love
Right.
that about
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So there trauma does, and I've been reading excellent book in recovery by an author and in recovery himself, Gabor Mate.
Okay.
And in the realm of Hungry Ghost, he talks about addiction, the myth of normal,
Hmm.
discusses how trauma intertwines and maybe even speeds up addiction. So
Yeah.
we grew up with a wonderful, one of the best people that anyone could have ever met, um, uh, named Amy,
Hmm.
and it's it's tough. It's been, I mean, I think you and I both agree, it's been a very tough time since she was gone,
Hmm.
since she was taken from us,
Right.
and the manner in which her and her kids were taken. Um, I think that's probably the first time where I finally leaned into grief and accepting that there's actually different things of trauma. So
Yes.
when talking about trauma and talking about Amy,
Hmm.
um, share your story on that.
So you kind of mentioned a little bit of we have big T's and little T's, meaning big trauma, little trauma. But at the end of the day, trauma is trauma, right? And for someone who maybe didn't have a lot of big T's trauma, their little T trauma to someone who has had big T's trauma, we're like, seriously, I wish that was my trauma, right? But so you and I had kind of talked about a little bit of being military kids, right? Like they say that a military kid goes through more loss just by people moving in their 18 years of being a military dependent than most people do in a lifetime. So, growing up in Alaska too, suicide was a thing. I had a lot of friends commit suicide living in Alaska. So loss was like, I had gone through a lot of loss by the time, we get to Amy, and so I'm gonna try to keep it together in this because it's a tough one. I mean, it was the one thing that almost took me out. I was actually in Vegas. It was just before I turned 10 in recovery. I was in Vegas at a supernatural convention. Don't judge me. Um, and I was with like some black belt Al-Anons and a couple of AAs, and um, I got a call from our mutual friend, Leticia, and I was in line to get photos with some of the cast. So I didn't answer. And, I listened to the voicemail and she sounds upset in the voicemail. And honestly, I thought something was going on with grandma. And so I was like, okay, I'll call her back. And I was taking a picture with Rowena at that point. We did a little selfie. I was like, okay, I'm going to step outside, have a smoke, call Leticia back. And, she's like, hey, I need to talk to you. And I was like, yeah, is everything okay? Is grandma all right? And she was like, yeah, it's not about grandma. She said something really bad happened. I need to tell you that Amy and the kids, there was a house fire and they didn't make it. And it was like the wind just got like knocked out of me. I was like, wait, what? Like, no, what? No, I mean, they're kids. What do you mean they didn't make it? Like, no, that's no, like immediate denial, you know?
Yeah.
And, meanwhile, like I said, I'm in Vegas and this is like day 2 of the convention. So if you've ever been to a convention, day 2, you still have quite a bit of money in your
Oh yeah.
pocket, because you're doing photo ops, autographs, all that stuff, and so I don't think I had called you yet because I was still in my planning mode of what I was going to do. Like there's a lot of alcohol that's come out since I've got sober. Like Fireball sounds delicious. I love cinnamon stuff. Cinnamon gummy bears, my jam. So a little resentful that the good stuff come out after I got sober. But there's also a lot of drugs out there that I like. Molly wasn't a thing, right? And so I start planning. I'm like, okay, when everybody goes to bed, I'm going. Like, I'm in Vegas. I can get my hands on anything I want, you know? And I'd gotten pictures with one of the cast member who's also one of us. And for sake of not breaking anonymity, I'm not going to say her name, but I went up to her after to get an autograph of our picture. But I had brought with me my little mini big book, and which is one of our literatures that we read. And you know, she had, I think, 4 or 5 years at the time. And I said, I was like, hey, you know, congratulations, you just got 4, like, good way to go, blah, blah, blah. She was like, oh, thank you. Like, how much time do you have? I was like, oh, I'm coming up on 10. And she was like, oh, that's awesome. Now, Zoe, like, when you talk with someone who has more time with you and they're coming up on an anniversary, like, it's like, hey, thanks for leading the way, whatever, something like that, right? She signs my book, Just Stay. And it was like a freaking 2x4 hit me. Like, shit. All right. So I turn around. I messaged one of our mutual friends because I had messaged you and you hadn't responded right away. And I was terrified that you were going to get on Facebook and see it and see the news. People were being really good about not posting it right away. I think most people didn't post it till later that evening. I think we all waited until Sil posted something.
Now, I'm going to jump in here real quick because I think people need to understand that you and I are living in the lower 48 at this time.
Right.
And there is a vast difference between Alaska time and lower 48 time. And Leticia, she was still living in Alaska at the time, so she was local with that. You and I are easily, compared to Alaska time, 2, if not 3 hours ahead.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So I messaged our other mutual friend, Bryce, and I sent him my number because I didn't think he had it. And I told him he needed to call me and that I needed him to tell you to call me or get a message to you to call me. And so Bryce called me. I told Bryce, and he was on the same boat of we need to let Zoe know right away. Because although we were all friends with Amy, and like I kind of joked that we were like the 3 Musketeers because we were like the OGs, you, me, and Amy, as far as we've known each other the longest, right? We all knew that it was going to hit you different. Like, you were the closest to her out of all of us, you know? And that was my biggest fear, that you were going to find out on Facebook, which, pro tip for anybody, if someone dies, get your ass off Facebook. It's no one's business until their family posts it. Shut the hell up, you know? And so, you know, I think he got the message to you. I think he told you, but then told you to also call me. And so we talked, and, you know, I told you I was in Vegas and that I didn't want to be sober and feel the pain of that, you know?
Yeah.
And you were the one that was like, no. She would want you to be there. She would want you to celebrate. And I'm like, yeah, but the right thing to do is to get on a plane and get to Alaska. But I just spent all this money to be here. And I was immediately feeling bad and just like, I didn't know what to do, you know? And you were like, if you left right now, she'd be pissed. Like, no, you stay there. If you can get to Alaska, great. If not, that's fine, you know? And again, for those that don't know, to get to Alaska, period, is an expensive ticket. To get to Alaska quick is a ridiculously expensive ticket. Like, at least, what'd you spend? Like $1,000 to get there as fast as you did?
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
at least. And then
least.
Trying to get work off. And at the time, we had a toddler infant, you know, trying to like get everything ready. I mean, here you are, you're in Vegas and you're already remote from your home.
Right.
So that, you know, okay, not only do I have to leave Vegas, but now I've got to, you know, let everyone back at work know. And it's crazy when you think about that. But then, oh yeah, by the way, it's not like, 24-hour service to Alaska. Like, the arrivals and departures are very interconnected.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's not, it was something that just wasn't feasible. I mean, financially, I wasn't going to be able to cut it to get the home, and I don't know about you, but I haven't lived there in 20 years, but Alaska will always be home, right?
Hmm.
Like my formidable years were there. So it's always going to be home. And it just wasn't going to work for me to get home, and one thing that we're always taught, at least I've always been taught, is that when I'm in self, get into action,
Yep.
So I kind of made it my mission to talk to you every day, whether it was text or a phone call or to talk to your wife at the time. Like I made sure I was talking to someone. If I wasn't able to talk to you that day, that at least laid eyes on you that day, um, and then to check in on Sil. Like I was constantly getting out of myself to talk to you or to talk to her mom and try to be as present as I could without being there. That
Right.
was the hardest part, was not being there. It was really hard. Um, in my experience of loss, for me, it's harder to accept it if I can't actually be at your funeral.
Hmm.
And so that was tough to not be able to be there, but I was in spirit. I did the candle thing. I joined the Zoom on the effort with the school. That was heart wrenching. She had two small kids, and kids shouldn't have to go through that loss and understand that their little friend's never going to come back. Like that's just awful. Um, it's funny. This is the tattoo, my Amy tattoo, Amy and the kids, and this is the flower you sent me a picture of at the funeral, and so I do feel like she's always with me, it was definitely, it was tough. That was a tough loss, and uh I would qualify that as a big T, you know, it's something that changed, truly changed the trajectory of, without getting into Amy's story, after that happened, I was in a really off and on dysfunctional relationship, right? That it was a secret. Nobody knew about it. Whenever we did hook back up, nobody knew about it, and um, after all that happened, it was like, okay, I'm done. I'm not doing that anymore, and that ended horribly. So then, and then I got in a really bad car accident. And so then there was that. And that was when my sponsor was like, bro, like, you need therapy. Like, we are not moving forward. Literally, she's like, I am not moving forward with you until you get into therapy, and again, God showing up and show off, I found a therapist who shared my same faith and, understood that I had a sponsor. She knew my sponsor. And although they didn't talk like together, the two of them, um, they worked, they coincide with each other. That, my sponsor would say, hey, what did you and Elizabeth talk about today? What are you guys going to work on? What's next? And then I would tell her. And then anything I brought back to Elizabeth, I brought to my sponsor. And it was like a tag team effort to get me right, because I was not in any shape of the word okay,
Right.
and it took a really long time to finally get to that point of like, all right, I think I'm all right, I think I'm gonna be okay, and then when I did go home uh this past February, not this past, it was a couple years ago. I went home because I call her my Alaska mom, was put on hospice, and I was able to go home to say bye. And Leticia and I went to Amy's headstone, Amy and the kids, and we paid our respects. And I smoked a cigarette with her, and sat there and talked with her, and like it is nice that they made that beautiful memorial for her and the kids, because like it's nice to be able to go to that spot, but I do believe that in order to go to Amy, I just have to go right here, she's not that far, but yeah, that was probably the closest I'd ever been, in the fact that I was planning it. I knew, like, I'm gonna go get me a couple shots. I mean, I was planning the drinks, I was planning the drugs, like, I'm in Vegas, I gotta throw a rock and I can find something, like,
Right.
I don't have to throw it that far, it's close. You know what I'm saying? So that's when, I mean, there's a fine line, right, between getting into service to get out of self and using that as a way to not face what's happening. There's a fine line between that, right? I can get into service and still do the work that I need to do to get through whatever it is. Like in this case was therapy, but I was still sponsoring people. I was still, putting the shopping carts away at the grocery store. I was still doing the little bits of service that I could while still doing the work that I needed to on myself. It wasn't like I just put the blinders on. I mean, I did at first, right? The blinders at first was my obsession with Zoe, and is Zoe okay? And my obsession with her mom, is her mom okay? Which of course she's not, you stupid. You know what I mean? Like,
love you, Sil.
Like, love you, Sil, but like, of course she's not okay. Are you kidding me? You know what I'm saying? Like, so there was so much of all that it's like, in that moment, that's all I could do was to focus on that. And then eventually once getting into therapy and addressing the loss, and then realizing like, yeah, there's a loss there, but there's been some really heavy losses in my life that I had never looked at. I mean, our family friend, she was like, we kind of joked that my mom was like her godmother. We've known her since she was a baby. She had a massive brain aneurysm at 8 years old. And like immediately, again, everybody just packed up and we went home. Like we were there for a week for the services and to be there for the family and all of that. And there was really never something that I did any work on. It was just like, yeah, she died. Yeah, it was sad. She was young. It was very sad. But then it was just like that big wall of, nope, back up. We're not talking about that. Like, rude, disrespectful. We don't talk about it. That was the big thing that I think a lot of us in recovery went through and still go through to this day of like, oh no, yeah, we're not talking about that. Thanks though. Move on. Next topic. Don't talk about that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And albeit like, yes, it is appropriate to have that conversation with some people, but like not your sponsor. Like I remember, in recovery, we have 12 steps. And one of those steps is we share with our sponsor, like our history, right? And my very first 4-step, no one in my family was on it. Like no one. My sisters, my brother, my parents, grandmas, aunties, nobody, which is not common, right? Like at least you're going to put your mom on there for grounding you when you were 10. Like there's got to be something that you have a resentment about with your family, right? And I remember my sponsor was like, pause, because we had gotten to like number 10. She's like, are your parents on here? Like grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, anyone? I was like, no, we don't talk about that. Like, why would I put them on here? No. She's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're not done. Go back home, finish your 4-step, come back and talk to me. You know what I mean? Like, because I still had that whole, like, there's some things that are off limits.
Right.
And yes, that's healthy to do with the average Joe. I'm not going to tell you my deepest, darkest secrets. It's not so normal to do that with a sponsor or a therapist, So, it's just, there is definitely that difference of the big T's and little T's. And that would have been a very big T for me.
So after maybe while you were in therapy, because by that time, like you said, you had what, close to 10 years of
by the time I started therapy, I had 10 years.
10 years. Okay. So how did your view of your sobriety and recovery change once you started to do the therapy work on top of the 12-step work that you had done previous?
Well, I started to not think I was such a piece of shit.
Well, there we go.
Yeah. Progress. Yeah. I definitely, I started to see that I deserved better from anyone, and not in like an ego way. Right. But like, God bless him, Bobby and I met, it had been like years since I had done therapy. We met when I was 12 years sober. And so, good 2 years into the whole therapy process. Right. And, our first date, I literally told him, like, I'm not willing to paint any red flags green for you. And also, it's up to you. You can either be an asset in my life or not. But like, I don't need you to be okay in my own life, and God love him. That was like date 2. And he's still here. You know what I mean? Like I told him from the get, and that was something that I never truly felt. Like I never truly felt like, and not like Karen level that how dare you talk to me like that. But I never truly felt like I deserved respect. And that was a here thing. I wasn't taught that necessarily. Some people showed that or didn't give me that respect that I you may think would have been immediate from them, right? But it was something that it took me a while to do that, and more so, it took me even longer to actually believe it. Like I remember my therapist had me write down like what an ideal partner would be. And at this point, I'm like, F men. Like I wasn't going the other way, but like F men. Like I'm good. I'm just going to be the single dog mom, cool ass aunt. I'm good with that title. I'm fine, but she was like, well, why don't we just write down like, what would an ideal partner be? And so I did. I wrote it down and I literally handed it to her. And I was like, here's your unicorn list, because unicorns aren't real and neither is that person.
Oh, wow.
And truly, not only did I not believe that there was a person like that, but I didn't believe that I deserved a person of that caliber, and it wasn't until like we started to go from weekly therapy sessions for a good year to like every other week, once a month therapy sessions that I finally was like, no, A, I like the person looking back at me. B, that person deserves the best. It's up to me to make sure she gets it. Whether that be I deserve the best by getting up and taking a shower and taking care of myself, or by treatment from others. I'm not going to get talked down to. I don't care what your title is. I'm not going to be disrespected. I don't care if you're my boss, if you're my, you know what I mean? Like there's a way to talk to someone. And I learned like I get to say, sorry, you don't get to talk to me like that. Like, thanks though. I'm gonna go ahead and move on, and that was something that I had learned earlier in recovery, but I didn't have the courage or the belief truly that I was worthy to say like, oh, I'm sorry. No, I don't know who the hell you're talking to, but I know it's not me. So good day. I'm out. You know what I mean?
So we're approaching. I know whenever you and I talked about this, we talked yesterday, and you're like, well, how long are we to talk? I'm like, at least 30 minutes, and we're almost to an hour. So, but I do want to end on this note here, or at least before we get out of here.
Yeah.
Spirituality is such a key component for a 12-step program.
Absolutely.
But not only just to 12-step and sobriety, but truly to recovery of self. And again, I can't recommend his book. I'm going to send you the link to it. You need to
please do.
Gabor Mate's In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. And he talks about how it is vital to have not just the abstinence physical recovery process, but true spiritual work, spiritual strength. And so you, like many others that come into a 12-step program, you had this concept of God growing up with the religion that you practice, that your family introduced you to. Did that change? Did that concept of God change at all? Or did you just merely adapted it or, molded it a bit more to fit what your definition of God was after or once you got into a 12-step program? How did that concept of God change, if at all?
I mean, it's definitely fluctuated, right? Like there was a fear of God for a long time. And again, 10 years sober, there was a lot of things that happened at 10. And one of the things is that mantra that I had was very adamant about old ideas and addressing them and finding where their root comes from, so that we can understand why we have that idea. And if it's not a good old idea, like, because some old ideas are just plain fact. Like a woman should not walk into a dark alley by herself. Old idea? Yes. True. Also, yes. Don't go in a dark alley. You know what I mean? Like, so there are some parts of old ideas that are good. One of the old ideas that I had was God kept score, or that if something bad was not supposed to be happening, that God was going to stop it. And I know exactly where that old idea comes from. I remember, I think we were in second grade when that AWACS plane crashed.
Yep.
Remember that?
Yep.
And I had asked why it happened and why God didn't stop it. And someone of influence said, well, if God doesn't want bad things to happen, he'll put his hand down to stop it. Meanwhile, there were things happening in the house that shouldn't happen in a girl's home, right? Or anyone's home for that matter.
Right.
And, like that was something that I was like, oh crap. Like, so I immediately had a fear of God. Right. And if like he was keeping score and if he doesn't want it to happen, it's not going to happen. And so therefore, whether it be I'm grounded, or I got a spanking, or, you know, this person's being mean to me, or, you know, this teacher's the worst, whatever, you know, or, you know, Chuck Sweet, our softball field was named after him. Like, he died, like, God meant for it to happen, you know? And so there was this, and, you know, in recovery, we say God is either everything or he's nothing. Pick one. What is your choice to be? You know, and, well, God's not rape. God's not Amy and the kids dying. God, you know what I mean? Like, there are certain things that I can look at and say, I know that's not of God.
Right.
So finding that balance, right, of really, and really, like, it took me going to church, truthfully, like, to each their own. We say it, to thine own self be true, right? For me, there were things that I thought I had heard in my church growing up. I thought the priest said that, or, you know, that, whatever. And then I started going back to church more regularly, and I'm like, weird. They're not saying nothing that I thought they said, you know? And this is where we come into the whole thing of that men, human people, are fallible, right? But this, whether it be religion or spirituality or whatever, it all comes from some form of higher power, right? That is not fallible, that is completely omnipotent, meaning all-knowing, right? And while I don't think that, you know, like Amy and the kids, that wasn't God, you know what I mean? But I do think that God worked on that. I do believe that God worked through that. I do believe that you and I became a lot more closer, obviously, right? Sil did a lot of work with making sure that that area of Anchorage fire code was fixed, like, probably saved hundreds of people just by doing that. You know what I mean? So while I don't think, okay, God needed the kids to die and Amy to die in a horrible, tragic accident that could have been avoided so that these people's fire code was good. No, I don't believe that. Or that, you know, so that Zola and I could be reconnected again. Because, I mean, obviously we were on social media. We would, you know, comment on each other's stuff, but we'd never really had full adult conversations, right? It was more so like, yeah, I've known him since I was a kid. Of course we're friends on Facebook. Like, yeah, I give him shit, he gives me shit. It wasn't like a, you know, regular banter that we have now, right? And so, you know, it took kind of shifting that view, right? And realizing that those ideas I had of that higher power were man-made. I didn't get that from God, right? And like, I remember people would say, like, God's my best friend. Like, he's my go-to. I talk with him about everything. And I was like, ew, gross. Why are you doing that? Like, he's busy. He got shit to do. You know what I mean? And then I look at it and I'm like, well, where does that come from? That he's busy. You know what I mean? And, you know, and then, so then it's doing the work to see where that idea comes from, and then replacing it with, you know, that my God, the one who I choose to have a personal relationship with, he wants me to have that meeting with him every day. You know, I'm not sure. I'm a metaphor person, right? Like, I need to see it in my head. So I'm not sure if you've heard the story of, like, this woman is really, really busy, right? And she tells God, like, hey, I'm going to meet you in the study every morning at 8:00, right? So every morning at 8:00, she walks in, there's Jesus sitting there at the armchair, ready to have the conversation, right? And they do this regularly. They're having this routine going and everything's good. Every morning, she's having that meeting with them every morning. And then one morning, the kids are late for school. She's got to hurry up. She's got to go, you know, meets them the next day. And now, as life happens, right, eventually she stops going into the room. And one day she walks by the room and she sees the lights on and it's 8:00. And she goes in and God's like, you made an appointment. I'm here. And for me, that's the reality of that. Like, when people are like, oh, God and I were on a different page. God didn't change the page. You did. You know what I'm saying? Like, I changed the page. I'm the one who doesn't show up for the appointment. Yeah. Because I truly believe that my God, my higher power, he craves me to come to him. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't need me to function. I need him to function. And, you know, just like with a normal friendship, right? Like, if I don't talk to someone on a regular basis, right? We're not as close. Like, I don't know what's going on in your day-to-day life. because we don't talk every day, which is
Right.
fine. We are those type of friends that you and I can pick up the phone and it's like no time has passed. You know
Right.
what I mean? Those are the best kind of friends I have, in my opinion. But, the ones who they're your ride or dies that, I call them your top fives, you talk often, you talk frequently. They know what's going on with you. They know your struggles. They know what you're going through. Like, if I want to have a top 5 relationship, meaning bond and trust and full transparency with a person, and then I'm wondering why I don't feel close to God, but I'm not doing the same thing with him, like that completely shifted my idea of how do I increase my relationship with my higher power. The
Yep.
same way I do with people in human form. I talk to you on a regular basis. I tell you my fears. I tell you what I'm scared of. I tell you what I'm looking forward to, what I'm excited for. You know what I mean? Like, everything. And
Mhm.
although God knows everything, obviously, he's a creeper. He sees all. Like, I still need to let him know. Like, and for me, it's a conversation. It's not, yeah, sometimes I do hit my knees and, I'm in that sincere prayer mode. A lot of times the best prayers that I've had is when, my husband's gone, I'm getting ready, phone's on do not disturb. And it's like, all right, God, this is what we're doing. Like, I don't know what you're doing here. I don't know what the plan is. If you could provide some bullet points, that would be fan-frickin-tastic. But in the meantime, like, I just need to see you. Just show me where you're at in this. I don't need the answer. Just show me where you're at. And I say probably 8 out of 10 times, if my eyes are open, I see it. And that gives me that trust and that faith to continue to go on. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But it's an ever evolving process. A lot of times in recovery, when we're going through the first few steps, we have to identify who our higher power is and what do they look like and all of that, which is all well and good. But if I'm going to put my God in a box, it's very easy to pick up that box, put it on the shelf, and walk away. My God and my higher power, and I hope this for everybody in recovery, is limitless. I'm not going to put limits on what my God can do. You know what I mean? Like, I have a friend of mine who, she was diagnosed with cancer. She's on borrowed time. Okay, God, I see you. Like, thank you for the borrowed time. I love this.
Yeah.
We're rocking and rolling. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, there was a time where I looked at everything like, ew, why are you doing this, God? And then it flipped. I was like, oh, I see what you did there, God. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Thanks for this opportunity to grow in this level. You know what I mean? And when we change that perspective, it turns from being this God who's like, ew, at least for me, right? To a God that I'm like, wow, I see what you did. And if you look, truly, you shouldn't have to look too hard. In recovery or not, right? Shouldn't have to look too hard, but especially for those of us in recovery where I can say like, no, I should have died. That should have killed me.
Yeah.
Or they should have killed me. Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, there are a lot of things that I can look back on and be like, yeah, there's my proof. There is a God. He's here. He's showing up and showing off. My life is proof of that. I live a life today that, just 2 things really quick. I know you want to wrap up. In our world, we say this is an experience you must not miss. Okay. That doesn't just mean the meetings and the sponsoring and all of that. That means, Zoe saw on Facebook, like, I went on a cruise with my entire family, all 19 of us, right? And my nephew, that 4-year-old, okay, he came up at one point. He's like, oh man, we gotta go take a picture of the sunset, and my sister grabbed her phone to hand it to him to go take a picture. And he was like, no, Jesse, I want to take a picture with you and the sunset. And like, immediately my eyes well up, because had I not said yes, had I not allowed God to work in my life, I wouldn't have been sitting right there, right then, being present in the moment with my nephew to go take that picture. You know what I mean? Like, this is an experience you must not miss, and the reality of it is that, yes, there's a little bit of work and there's a little things that we have to do to get to where we need to be, right? But if we do the work, I guarantee you, and I've told you this time and time again, I guarantee you, your life is going to get somewhere to where truly, like, my life is a blessing. There's a lot of things going on right now that aren't how I want them to be. But at the end of the day, the things that I have in my life, the life I get to have today is much more than I deserve. And I can't give credit to anybody for that other than my higher power. And that's where the difference is on the spirituality. You know what I mean? There was a day where it's like, look what I did. Whereas now it's, look what God did. Yeah, I did a little bit of work, but look what God did. You know what I mean? It's a complete 180 on it.
Yep. Well, I cannot thank you enough for coming on here and sharing your story and being so not just open, but vulnerable.
Sure.
A lot of people, they can talk, but to be vulnerable, that's a whole different level that I think is really missing right now, especially those that are early in sobriety, early in recovery, and to hear that experience, strength, and hope. I know, there's a lot of cliches that are used in 12 steps.
Yeah.
And some get played out more than others. But I think experience, strength, and hope, those three pillars are just so critical and really there needs to be more recovery out loud, hence this podcast. But you are, without a doubt, one of the biggest blessings in my life. And it's true. You, at the time, whether it's as a childhood, as a child, as someone that hit a bump early on in adulthood, and now finally embracing recovery without your direct and indirect guidance, influence. It is one of those things where I can sit here and I can wonder, and I could go down that rabbit hole and say, God, how different would my life be if? But instead, now I'm able to sit here and I'm able to say, you know what? I'm thankful. I am beyond grateful to have you as a near and dear friend. I am grateful that you have shown what it is like to recover out loud and to have no apologies for that mindset, that lifestyle, that way of being. And I'm hopeful that hopefully someone that has stumbled across this, or it's been shared to, they hear something and they run with it, just like you have done for me. And there's not enough time, there's not enough words, there's not enough expressions to describe how much you mean to me. And the fact that you get to be my test guinea pig on this just means the world. And I thank you so much.
Well, the feeling's mutual. I mean, from being in third grade and watching you break your desk over a C, just saying, from Miss Latoya, you remember that? To, all the adult stuff that we've gotten to go through. I mean, it's a testament. I mean, the bonds that we're blessed and also cursed as military kids of the amount of loss we have to go through, but also the fact that we've maintained our friendship over the years. And, it's truly, you're a huge blessing for me. And whenever I share my story here, I always talk about you, because you're a huge impact on that. I mean, albeit, it was selfish of me needing to be of service. So I focused on you. If I didn't have you, I probably would have gotten drunk because I had somebody to focus on. I had somebody who actually answered the phone when I called them to see how they're doing, even though I'm sure I drove you crazy, know? So it's a beautiful thing. And, at the end of the day, one thing that I know to be certain is a grateful heart doesn't get drunk. And if you can just find one thing you're grateful for, whether it be the roof over your head, those beautiful girls that are in your life today, you know what I mean? Like, those are all things that if I drink or drug, they will go. Maybe not right away, but eventually they will be gone, and if I'm grateful for it, kind of hard to get drunk, ain't it?
It very much so. All right. Well, thank you for the time today. And as always, I will be in touch with you.
Of course, you better. Love you, bud.